there! So this is a teaching video to give you just a little bit of insight into the tips and tricks for playing Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. I'm going to talk a little bit about the solo arrangement and a little bit about the duet arrangement in this. But let's start with talking about the solo arrangement. Well, let's first actually talk about the piece a little bit in general. So Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring is a piece by Bach, J.S. Bach, part of the Baroque period, so this was the early 1700s when he wrote this. And it is it's actually a part of the last movement of one of Bach's cantatas. And originally this piece was scored for voices that had the chorale melody in it, and it was accompanied by, I think it was trumpets and oboes and strings, as well as a basso continuo, which is some sort of keyboard instrument that fills in the background in that. So obviously, when this was first written, it was intended for lots of instruments playing together, which gave the opportunity to have a lot of moving parts going in different directions. So it's a little bit of a challenge to take this piece and put it onto an instrument where you have two hammers to work with. But absolutely possible, and actually a lot of people have done it, so if you don't like my arrangement, you can go get ideas from some other people on YouTube as well. So when I turned this into a solo arrangement, I was keeping in mind what were the pieces of the arrangement. What did I need to focus on in there? And there's really two things going on mainly. One is that there's a chorale melody, a long drawn-out melody that the choir sings in the fully orchestrated version. And that actually wasn't Bach's melody. That was written by Johann Schaap a few decades earlier. And Bach, when he did this piece, took that chorale melody and just put accompaniment around it. So all of those beautiful moving lines, all of that stuff running through it is actually just accompaniment for the chorale melody. Now, I would make the argument that the accompaniment is really the main draw of this piece, but we do need to keep in mind that it is supposed to support the chorale melody. So when the chorale melody came into the arrangement, I made sure to focus on that as my melody line, in particular in the solo arrangement when I had to make some choices about which lines I was going to put in. So the structure of this, looking again at that solo arrangement, the structure of this is we have some background intro, and then we have a chorale melody with a little background interlude in between. We do more of that background, we come back to that chorale melody with a little background interlude in between. We do our background again, then we have the chorale melody, but it's a little bit of a variation that goes into a different tonal sound, a different key really, in that section. And then we do some variations on that background to finish up the piece. So it's fairly repetitive, but it kind of has a verse-chorus feel, right? So that background you could call the verse and the chorale the chorus. That means you basically get a verse, a chorus, a verse, a chorus, something like a bridge where we change that chorale. Oh, we have to go back to the verse first, then we go to a bridge, and then we come back, I guess, to the verse. So maybe that's not the best analogy, but it gives you an idea. Alright, so let's break this down in a little bit more detail, what you should be looking for in here. So I've done my best. I've written out the chord structure for you if that helps you follow along what's going on. Keep in mind those chords written over the music as you go through it. And I've done my best to pull out notes in the chords that were particularly prominent in the accompaniment and that did a good job defining the chord I was interested in. So at the beginning of this, we just have these single bass notes that accompany our accompaniment melody, if we want to call it that. So it goes something like this. Great. So we have bass notes over a melody. So you do want to make sure to bring out that melody and keep the bass notes below that. In those bass notes, though, it can be hard to remember which bass notes to play all the way through that. So one thing you should really key in on is that a lot of places in here there are what we call walking bass lines. So the bass line moves one step at a time, either up a scale or down a scale. We see that for the first time in this arrangement in measure 3, where we have a bass line that starts on A, walks up to B, walks up to C, and then we jump down to a new note. And this sounds like this. This is measure 3 in the solo arrangement. Sorry, let me try it again. So you hear that rising line in the bass. Let me play that again. Under the moving melody line. So keying in on that kind of pattern can really help you. Oh, I think it's hailing. hailing outside. I'm not sure what it's doing. Anyway, keying in on that pattern can help you keep track of some of those notes. That walking bass line concept is really clearly there in the chorale interlude. So let me play you that, starting at measure 9. Listen for the walking bass line. It's going to walk down, go back up a step, and walk down again, and then it's going to walk up. So listen to it here. Interlude of that accompaniment melody. So again, keep that in mind as you're going through there. There's going to be walking bass lines all throughout that can help you keep track of it. It also just helps to move the music forward. Bach was a real master at using walking bass lines to add some forward momentum to his arrangements. Other interesting stuff to note in this, if we go to that kind of bridge-like section, which starts at measure 40 in the solo arrangement, that's where we actually kind of shift to a new key. We go in, we're in the key of G to start with. We go to D, the D chord momentarily, but that really brings us into the key of A minor for a little while in that section, really starting about measure 41. A minor eventually, turn the page here, resolves back to a section in the key of C, which is the relative major of A minor, and that happens, where is it, around measure 49. That we really, I guess it's a little bit earlier than that. So 47, we're pretty thoroughly in C by there. So again, if you're thinking chords, that may help you center in on which notes you're going to play in the harmony there. But let's just start this kind of bridge section, starting at measure 40, and talk about what's going on there, because it does get a little bit tricky in here. So it starts with a walking bass line. Right, just a simple downward walking bass line in the harmony. That's measure 40. Measure 41 also has a walking bass line, but it's a little bit different. I'm going to play you measures 40 and 41 together. It's going to sound like this. And that's the beginning of measure 42 there. I'm going to play that for you one more time so you can hear that, how that fits together. Happens in there. You may be used to playing music that's in like a 4/4 time signature and having triplets in it, so you go to a 3 feel over that 4/4 time signature. This is kind of the opposite. This piece is written in 9/8, so it has more of, if you can divide that into groups of 3, it has more of a 3/4 feel to it. Measure 41 in the solo arrangement has tuples in it. So instead of triplets, it's tuples or tuplets, that take it from that 3/4 feel into more of a 2/4 type feel in those parts. So what you want to do to get through these measures is really keep in mind the main 3-beat pulse in this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Normally we kind of divide those into triplets, right? So if we're starting in that accompany part, for example, 1, 2, 3, right? So we have each of those beats divided into 3. In this case, in the chorale, you have to take those beats that you're used to dividing into 3 and divide them into 2 beats. So if you keep that main 3-beat pulse in mind, that'll make it easier for you to switch to that 2/4 feel. So again, we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, and. So you can count that 1, 2, and 3, and in measure 41. So that might help you a little bit there. It's a really cool effect. I love that feel in the song with just giving you, saying, oh, this is a different section. There's something different going on here. There are some accidentals in this section, so make sure to look out for that. I also made just a few very minor changes to the melody line for that accompaniment melody because some of those accidentals don't normally fit on a 15/14 instrument. So if that really bothers you and you want to put some of those back in, if you have another arrangement of this, you're welcome to do that. But I've made this so it'll fit on a 15/14 instrument. So keep that in mind going through. All of this, you're going to want to make your own decisions about what's comfortable for you with hammering patterns. Your left hand's going to end up doing most of the melody, your right hand's going to end up doing most of the harmony. The one place where I might give you a specific suggestion about how to hammer it, because it's a little bit difficult to do that, is starting in measure 60, where we go into kind of the ending sequence. And that part of the piece, we actually take this 3/4 feel, and we're dividing each of those beats into triplets, like we just talked about. And we have in here what we call a hemiola. And a hemiola is where you stay in the same time signature that you have, but you feel like you're actually in a different time signature. And that often jumps out on a piece of music if you're looking at the music, seeing that line starting with measure 60, a lot of notes tied over bar lines. That's not always, but it's often a good indication that there might be a hemiola going on. And so instead of feeling like we're in 9/8 here, we actually kind of switch to feeling like we're in 6/8. Or instead of feeling like we have 3 main beats to a measure, we switch to feeling like we have 2 main beats to the measure. Here's the part starting at 60, so you can just hear what it is. I'm droning on this low G, and that comes every 2 main beats, or every 6 beats if you're subdividing in there, which makes us feel that we're in more of a 6/8 or a 2 beats per measure feel. What I do with the hammering here, just to make that easier, because you keep having to come back to that low drone, on these arpeggios, my favorite hammering pattern is to do left, left, right, left, right, left. So left, left, right, left, right, to do is I'm mostly leaning on the left hand, which allows me to get that right hand down in time to play those bass notes. But it also gets the right hand involved, so I can keep the line a lot smoother through those arpeggios. So again, it's like this. Left, left, right, left, right, left, 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 right, left, right, left, 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 right, left, right, left, 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 right, left, right. Now, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, I'm right-handed, so I work from that perspective. So you may have different preferences if you're left-handed, which is why I don't give you hammering patterns throughout this, because some people will be much more comfortable with some over than others. This is one of those spots that kind of locks you in, though, because you are playing those bass notes and having to get the melody notes in between. So it pretty well locks you in. I'd at least give that a try. That's my recommendation in that section. Other than that, I think it's pretty explanatory, so just keep in mind, look for those places where it repeats the same kind of verse or chorus feel, either the accompaniment or the chorale, so you're not trying to relearn something that you've already learned. Recognize where those repeats are, so keep in mind the structure, look for those walking bass lines, and keep in mind that little thing in the measure 41 with those tuplets. That's really the tricky part. So I'm going to move on to talking about the duet just briefly here. Most of the comments are really just the same in the duet versus in the solo arrangement. So in the duet, the main thing though to keep in mind is if you're playing with another person, we're adding a lot more notes to this, which is super cool. It means that we can get a lot more of those lines in there than we can in the solo arrangement. But you're playing with another person, one of you is always going to have the more important part. One of you has the melody, and one of you has the harmony. And it's important for the melody line to stay above the harmony line. That's really tricky in a piece like this, because most of the time, not always, but most of the time we have the harmony notes in the lower notes on this instrument, and the melody notes in the higher notes. And on a hammered dulcimer, our low notes tend to be much louder than our high notes. So you got to keep that in mind, that you need to play even softer than you think you might need to in that harmony line to keep that below the melody line and help that stand out. One of the reasons I particularly emphasize this in this piece is that one of the really interesting things is that sometimes part one in the duet will be playing a line that at times serves as melody and at times should be harmony. So it's the exact same notes, the exact same patterns, but at some points you want that to be the melody, and sometimes you have to bring it down and let it be the harmony because we're playing the chorale melody over the top. So that's really unusual, where you have something that's really functioning as both harmony and melody, even if it's the same notes that are repeated. So what I've done for you in the duet arrangement is marked in the music which part has harmony and which part has melody. Again, I've made the decision that the chorale should be the melody wherever it comes out. You also have artistic license in this, though. If you decide you want a different part to come out louder, just be deliberate about it and make sure that it does come out in that piece. Most of this is, like I said, very similar to the solo arrangement. We're just adding some more notes to fill in those chords, and then getting some of those moving lines in there that we couldn't play with just our two hammers over the chorale lines. You do, again, in measure 41, have that same tuple thing going on, but it's a little more challenging in the duet arrangement because the other part, so one part's playing those tuples, and the second part is playing a triplet line. So in this case, we don't just imply that, we have been playing triplets and now we're going to add tuples. We're just shifting to that for a minute. In this case, we're going to keep those triplets going and play them at the exact same time as those tuples. That's really challenging. What's important is for both of you who are playing this arrangement to keep that really strong 3-beat pulse in your head. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1 and 2 and 3 and. Keep that strong 3-beat pulse and stay on those downbeats, those big pulses, is what's going to keep you together when you're playing with somebody else who's playing a tricky line like that. I will note in here, as I said, I had to make some adjustments in the solo arrangement in a few places because it wouldn't fit on a 15-14 instrument. Done the same thing here, so there are a few very minor melody changes. I also would point out, again in that kind of bridge section that has the interesting chorale, part 2 gets the melody I've marked that in measure 46. And that's actually not quite the strong melody in the piece. And the reason it's not is because I've given that second part a transition to make it feel more natural to get into the next melody part. So I have adjusted the melody there. So if you're looking for something familiar, it might be a little bit different. So just know that going into it, but the parts are meant to fit together to complement each other in the chords that need to be covered. Yeah, so I think that's the main points with that one. It's really very similar, again, to the solo arrangement, but you get so many more interesting moving parts when you play this as a duet. I really think that this piece, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, fits on the hammered dulcimer best as a duet, because you can honor all of those really spectacular lines that Bach wrote to support that really beautiful chorale melody. So I hope you'll reach out if you have questions about this stuff. I hope this has helped a little bit to kind of focus what you're doing with the piece, what to focus in on. And yeah, in the meantime, happy hammering.